He brought his mistress to finalize divorce. From pregnant wife, then the lawyer spoke. He collapsed. Marcus Thorne, a man who built his empire on hostile takeovers, sat with his impeccably dressed mistress, Chloe, on one side of the mahogany table. Across from them, 7 months pregnant and visibly trembling, sat his wife, Isabella. She was just a signature away from being erased. But as the lawyer cleared his throat, a single sentence reshaped the room, turning a simple divorce into a battleground where fortunes, futures, and the very definition of family would be shattered. The conference room at Sterling, Cromwell, and Finch felt less like a legal office and more like a mausoleum for dying marriages. Perched on the 40th floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, almost arrogant view of the city below. A sprawling map of lives and buildings that Marcus Thorne felt he owned a significant piece of. The silence inside was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the climate control system and the faint, rhythmic tap of Chloe's manicured nails on the polished mahogany. Isabella Rossi Thorne sat opposite them, her hands resting protectively on the taut swell of her belly. The baby, a boy they had once eagerly planned for, kicked softly, a secret flutter of life in a room thick with the stench of endings. She focused on the sensation, a tiny anchor in the swirling vortex of her husband's betrayal. Marcus, her Marcus, looked at her with the same detached coolness he reserved for a failing subsidiary. His face, once the landscape of her entire world, was now a mask of polished indifference. The bespoke suit, the ridiculously expensive watch, the confident posture, it was all a performance, a carefully constructed facade for the woman sitting beside him. Chloe Vance was everything Isabella was not. Sleek, sharp, and exuding an almost predatory ambition. Her blonde hair was a severe architectural bob, her dress a slash of crimson against the room's muted grays. She met Isabella's gaze with a flicker of something that might have been triumph, but was quickly veiled by a practiced look of detached sympathy. It was more insulting than outright hostility. Chloe was the upgrade, the newer model, and her presence was a calculated cruelty, a final public stamp on Isabella's humiliation. "If we're all ready," Mr. Abernathy began, his voice a dry rustle of paper. He was a senior partner, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the weary disappointment of other people's failed promises. He slid a thick stack of documents across the table. "This is the final settlement agreement. As per Mr. Thorne's instructions, it is generous." Isabella's lawyer, a kind but outgunned public defender named Sarah Jenkins, placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Generous is a subjective term, Mr. Abernathy." Marcus let out a soft, impatient sigh. "Let's not drag this out, shall we? Isabella gets the lump sum, the apartment on the west side, and the fund for the child. It's more than fair. It's more than she could have ever dreamed of before she met me." The words, spoken with such casual dismissal, landed like stones in Isabella's chest. Dreamed of? She had dreamed of a life with him, of laughter filling their home, of growing old together. This payout, this transactional severance, was a nightmare. She had loved him not for his wealth, but for the man she thought he was beneath it, the man who could quote obscure poetry, who loved the specific way the sun set over the Amalfi Coast, who had once traced the lines of her palm and sworn he saw their future written there. She looked at him, really looked at him, searching for a ghost of that man. But there was nothing. Only the cold, hard glint of a predator who had tired of his prey. "The child's name is Leo," Isabella said, her voice quiet but firm, a small act of defiance. Chloe shifted in her seat, recrossing her long legs. "Marcus, darling, we have that reservation at Per Se." The dismissal was absolute, a future being dismantled, a child being bargained for, and all Chloe could think about was dinner. Marcus gave Chloe's hand a squeeze, a silent promise. "Almost done. Isabella, Marcus said, his tone softening into a practiced, manipulative caress. This is for the best. You'll be comfortable. You won't have to worry about anything. Just sign the papers, and we can all move on. Move on. He made it sound so simple, as if the last 5 years of her life, the baby growing inside her, could be neatly excised and forgotten. She thought of the nursery she had been painting, a mural of soft gray elephants and yellow stars. She thought of the tiny onesies folded in the drawers, the lullabies she hummed to her belly each night. Sarah Jenkins cleared her throat. Isabella, we've been over this. The terms are binding, but we need to be sure you're comfortable with them. Comfortable? She would never be comfortable again. But what choice did she have? Marcus held all the power. His legal team was a pack of sharks, and she had a guppy. Fighting him would mean a protracted, public battle that would drain her emotionally and financially, a battle she could not win. He would paint her as a gold digger, a hysterical, pregnant woman trying to extort him. He would win. He always won. With a trembling hand, she reached for the pen. The weight of it felt impossibly heavy. This was it. The moment she signed away her name, her marriage, her future. She could feel Marcus's impatience radiating across the table, a palpable force. Chloe was already mentally picking out wine pairings. Isabella uncapped the pen. The click echoed in the silent room. She drew a shaky breath, the sterile, air-conditioned air burning her lungs. Before Mrs. Thorne signs, Mr. Abernathy said, suddenly holding up a hand. He adjusted his glasses and picked up a different, much thinner folder from his briefcase. His expression had shifted. The practiced neutrality was gone, replaced by something unreadable, something that made the hairs on Isabella's arms stand on end. There is one additional matter to discuss. A codicil to the original prenuptial agreement. Marcus frowned, his carefully constructed composure cracking for the first time. A codicil? I don't recall any codicil. It was added 3 years ago, sir. At your request, Abernathy stated, his voice flat, betraying no emotion. He opened the folder. It pertains to the infidelity clause. A nervous energy shot through Marcus. The standard clause, yes, it's void if both parties are unfaithful, irrelevant. Not exactly, Abernathy said, his eyes finally lifting from the page to meet Marcus's. And for the first time that day, Isabella saw a flicker of something other than triumph in Chloe's eyes. It was fear. Abernathy took a slow, deliberate breath. The codicil, which you signed and had notarized on May 12th, 3 years ago, states that the infidelity clause is, and I quote, rendered null and void only in the event of mutual infidelity proven in a court of law. However, it further stipulates that if only one party is found to be unfaithful, that party forfeits all claims to marital assets, shared properties, and any and all holdings of Thorne Industries. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suffocating silence. Furthermore, Abernathy continued, his gaze unwavering, it designates the aggrieved party, in this case, Mrs. Isabella Rossi Thorne, as the sole beneficiary of the Thorne Family Trust, and grants her a 60% controlling interest in Thorne Industries, effective immediately upon the dissolution of the marriage. The room went utterly still. The hum of the climate control seemed to roar in Isabella's ears. Chloe's perfectly painted lips parted in a silent gasp. Marcus stared at Abernathy, his face draining of all color. He looked from the lawyer to Isabella, a dawning, horrified realization in his eyes. He tried to speak, but only a choked, gurgling sound escaped his throat. He clutched his chest, his knuckles white. His whole body began to tremble, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. And then, with a strangled cry, Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, the master of the universe, slid from his chair and collapsed onto the plush gray carpet in a heap. The memory hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow, so vivid it momentarily eclipsed the chaos erupting in the conference room. 3 years ago. A sun-drenched afternoon in their garden, the scent of lavender and roses thick in the air. Marcus had just closed the biggest deal of his career, a ruthless acquisition that had made headlines. He was electric, incandescent with victory, and had pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I'd give you anything," he had whispered, his voice thick with a raw, possessive passion that both thrilled and frightened her. "Anything? The whole world?" She had laughed, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "I don't want the world, Marcus. I just want you. You have me," he'd said, his eyes intense. "But I want to prove it. I want you to know in here," he tapped his chest, "and on paper, that you are the only one. That if I ever broke my promise to you, I would lose everything. Because without you, everything is nothing." It had been his idea. A grand, romantic gesture, he'd called it. A post-nuptial codicil. She'd found it excessive, almost morbid, but he had insisted. He'd drafted it with Abernathy himself, a dramatic, over-the-top declaration of loyalty, written in the same aggressive language he used for his business contracts. A scorched earth policy for his own heart. He'd made her come to the signing, presenting the document to her with a flourish, as if it were a priceless diamond. She remembered his signature, a bold, arrogant slash of ink. She remembered feeling a deep, unsettling premonition even then, a sense that this grand promise was not a shield for her, but another cage, another exertion of his control, a promise so absolute it was bound to break. Now that broken promise was echoing in the silent 40th floor room, ricocheting off the glass walls. Paramedics were working on Marcus, their movements efficient and impersonal. Chloe was a mess, her crimson dress a smear of color against her pale, shocked face. She was hovering, wringing her hands, her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. The Titan had fallen, and his heir apparent was utterly useless. Isabella remained seated, her hand still resting on her belly. A strange, icy calm had descended upon her. The initial shock had given way to a slow, creeping realization. The power dynamic in the room, in her life, had not just shifted. It had been inverted with the violence of a tectonic plate slip. An hour ago, she was the discarded wife, begging for scraps from the table of her own marriage. Now she was the table. "Mrs. Thorne?" Sarah Jenkins's voice was a soft intrusion. "Isabella? Are you all right?" Isabella looked at her lawyer, a woman who had been prepared to fight for a pittance, and saw her own shock reflected in her eyes. She nodded slowly. "I think so." Abernathy, ever the professional, had already guided Chloe to a chair in the corner, speaking to her in low, calm tones. He was managing the crisis, containing the fallout. He caught Isabella's eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a gesture of congratulations, or even solidarity. It was one of acknowledgement. The game had changed. The pieces were reset. The paramedics lifted Marcus onto a gurney. His face was ashen, his eyes closed. The mask of indifference had been replaced by one of stark, terrifying vulnerability. For a fleeting moment, a pang of the old, familiar love, the deep-seated instinct to care for him, surged through Isabella. She saw not the monster who had betrayed her, but the man whose nightmares she used to soothe. The man who couldn't sleep without the weight of her hand on his chest. But the feeling was quickly extinguished by the cold reality of his actions. He had brought his mistress to this meeting. He had planned to discard her and his unborn child with a check, reducing their lives to a line item on his balance sheet. This collapse was not a tragedy, it was a consequence. As they wheeled him out, Chloe scrambled to follow, her stilettos clicking frantically on the marble floor of the lobby. "I'm his fiancée," she called out to the paramedics, the word sounding desperate and flimsy. "I'm his emergency contact." One of the paramedics glanced at a form on a clipboard, then looked back, not at Chloe, but at Isabella. "Ma'am, the hospital will need his medical history. Are you his wife?" The question hung in the air. Chloe froze, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. All eyes turned to Isabella. For the first time, she held the power. She could have said no. She could have let Chloe, the usurper, take the reins. It would have been the easier path, but something had hardened in her. The soft, accommodating woman who had walked into this office was gone, burned away by the fires of betrayal and the stunning revelation of her new reality. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about Leo. It was about securing his future, a future her husband had been so willing to bargain away. Isabella rose slowly from her chair, her pregnancy lending her a new, undeniable gravitas. She walked past Chloe without a glance, her gaze fixed on the paramedic. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady, resonating with an authority she didn't know she possessed. "I am his wife. I'll handle everything." She walked out of the conference room, leaving Chloe standing alone amidst the wreckage of her ambitions. The view from the 40th floor was still breathtaking, but for the first time, Isabella didn't feel small beneath it. She felt like she could reach out and touch the horizon. The glass tower had been Marcus's throne. Now it was her fortress. And she was just beginning to understand the power of the weapons she had just been handed. The hospital was another kind of glass tower, sterile and white, where Marcus's office had been sleek and gray. St. Jude's private wing smelled of money and antiseptic, a place where illness was treated as an inconvenience to be managed with minimal fuss and maximum discretion. Isabella moved through the hushed corridors, her conversation with the cardiologist echoing in her mind. Stress-induced cardiomyopathy, a broken heart of sorts. The irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. Marcus Thorne, a man who had metaphorically broken countless hearts in boardrooms and bedrooms, had been felled by his own. The doctor, a man with kind eyes and a weary smile, had explained it was serious but likely temporary. "The heart muscle is stunned, not permanently damaged," he'd said, "but he needs absolute rest. No stress, and I mean zero." Isabella sat in the plush armchair beside Marcus's bed. He was asleep, looking smaller and strangely fragile against the pristine white sheets. The relentless hum and beep of the monitors were the only sounds in the room. This was the man who commanded armies of lawyers and brokers, whose voice could make markets tremble. Now he was tethered to machines, his power reduced to a faint, rhythmic pulse on a screen. She had spent the first few hours on the phone, a whirlwind of logistics. She spoke with Sarah Jenkins, who was in a state of euphoric shock and already strategizing with a team of corporate litigators she'd contacted. She spoke with Abernathy, whose tone remained impeccably neutral, though he confirmed the codicil was ironclad. Mr. Thorne was very specific in his instructions at the time, Mrs. Thorne. He wanted the terms to be inescapable, a word he had used to describe his love for her. Now it was the architecture of his downfall. Her final call was to her parents in Italy. She kept the details vague, simply telling them Marcus was unwell. Her mother, her loving, pragmatic mama, had immediately offered to fly over. "Isabella, you should not be alone. Not now." The warmth in her mother's voice, the unconditional love, was a stark contrast to the cold, transactional world she now inhabited. It was a reminder of who she was before she became Mrs. Thorne. A soft knock on the door broke her reverie. A nurse entered, followed by Chloe. The crimson dress had been replaced by a somber but equally expensive charcoal pantsuit. Her face was pale, but her makeup was perfect. The shock had worn off, replaced by a steely resolve. "He's my fiancé," Chloe said to the nurse, her voice tight with indignation. "I have a right to be here." The nurse looked helplessly at Isabella. "Mrs. Thorne?" Isabella felt a flicker of pity for the woman. Chloe had built her entire future around Marcus, only to have it evaporate in a single sentence. She was as much a victim of his hubris as Isabella was. But pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. This was a battle for survival, and Chloe had chosen her side long ago. "5 minutes," Isabella said, her voice even. "Then he needs to rest." The nurse nodded and retreated, closing the door softly. Chloe walked to the other side of the bed, her eyes fixed on Marcus's sleeping face. She reached out a hand to touch him, then seemed to think better of it, letting it drop to her side. "What are you going to do?" Chloe asked, her voice low, stripped of its usual confidence. "I'm going to make sure my child has a father," Isabella replied, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "And a future." Chloe let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "A future? You mean his future, his company, his money. Don't pretend this is anything other than what it is. You hit the jackpot, Isabella. Congratulations." "This was not a lottery I chose to play," Isabella said, her calm beginning to fray. "He did this, Chloe. He wrote the rules to this ugly game. He made his promises and he broke them. I am just the consequence." "He loves me," Chloe whispered, the words sounding like a desperate prayer. This was just a contract, a piece of paper. It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," Isabella corrected her gently. "It means 60%. The color drained from Chloe's face. She stared at Isabella, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You won't get away with this. The moment he wakes up, he'll fight you. He'll tear you apart in court. He'll say you coerced him, that he wasn't of sound mind. Wasn't he of sound mind 3 years ago, when he was celebrating the biggest victory of his career?" Isabella countered, the details from her memory giving her an unexpected strength. "Wasn't he of sound mind when he had it notarized? When he presented it to me as a grand declaration of his undying love? Mr. Abernathy seems to think it's one of the most airtight documents he's ever seen. Marcus made sure of that." Chloe was silent, her mind visibly racing, searching for an angle, a weakness. She had been his partner in ambition, his co-conspirator. She knew how to play the game. "You don't have it in you, Isabella," Chloe finally said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're not a killer, you're a gardener, a painter of nursery walls. You can't run an empire. The board will eat you alive. The shareholders will revolt. You'll run it into the ground in 6 months." The words were meant to wound, to remind Isabella of her place in Marcus's world, the decorative, gentle wife, kept in a gilded cage. And for a moment they found their mark. A wave of fear, cold and nauseating, washed over her. Chloe was right. What did she know of hostile takeovers and leveraged buyouts? Her degree was in art history. She had managed their homes, their social calendar, their charitable donations. She hadn't sat in a boardroom since a brief, uncomfortable stint at her father's small olive oil company a decade ago. But then she looked at Marcus, lying helpless in the bed. He had underestimated her. They all had. They saw the quiet, accommodating wife and missed the steel beneath. They had mistaken her kindness for weakness. "Maybe," Isabella said, her voice regaining its strength. "Or maybe a gardener knows that you have to prune the dead branches to allow for new growth." She stood up, her height matching Chloe's. "Your 5 minutes are up." Chloe stared at her, her jaw tight. A silent war was waged in that look, a promise of battles to come. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, her sharp, confident stride a little less certain than it had been before. Isabella watched her go, then turned back to the window. The city lights were beginning to glitter in the twilight, a diamond dust scattering of 1,000,000 lives, 1,000,000 stories. Marcus had always loved this view. He called it his kingdom. She had never wanted a kingdom. She had wanted a home, a family, a husband to love. But he had forced this upon her. He had handed her a crown of thorns and a broken scepter. And as she stood there, watching over the sleeping king, she realized with a terrifying clarity that she had no choice but to learn how to rule. For Leo, for herself. The gilded cage was open, and outside was a wilderness she would have to conquer or be devoured by. The first Thorn Industries board meeting was in 3 days. The words echoed in Isabella's mind, a drumbeat of impending doom. Sarah Jenkins had prepped her as best she could, bringing in a corporate law expert, a finance guru, and a PR specialist. They descended on Isabella's townhouse, a property she now technically owned, turning her serene cream and gold living room into a chaotic war room. Charts and graphs covered the coffee table where art books used to lie. The air, usually fragrant with jasmine and green tea, now smelled of takeout coffee and anxiety. Isabella sat through hours of briefings, the jargon washing over her. Fiduciary duties, shareholder value, Q3 projections, hostile bids. It was a foreign language, the dialect of the world Marcus had inhabited, a world he had deliberately shielded her from. "They'll see you as a temporary problem," said Julian Croft, the PR man, a sharp, impeccably dressed man who spoke in headlines. "The grieving wife, the emotional pregnant woman. They'll try to placate you, offer you a generous buyout to just go away." "Which you will not accept," added Maria Sanchez, the finance expert. Her expression was severe, her tone non-negotiable. "Your 60% is a controlling interest. It's not just a seat at the table, you are the table. They need you more than you need them." But Isabella didn't feel like the table. She felt like a fragile teacup placed in the center of it, about to be shattered by the heavy fists of the men who believed it was rightfully theirs. The board was comprised of Marcus's oldest allies, men who had built their fortunes alongside him. They were lions, and she was a lamb being led to slaughter. The night before the meeting, she couldn't sleep. The baby was restless, his kicks and turns a constant reminder of the life that depended on her. She wandered into the nursery, the half-painted mural of elephants and stars looking like a relic from another lifetime. She had been so naive, so blissfully unaware of the precariousness of her world. Her dreams had been soft and pastel-colored. Now, her reality was stark black and white, a world of contracts and consequences. She thought of Chloe's words, "You're a gardener, a painter of nursery walls." The contempt had been clear, but as she stood in the quiet, moonlit room, she began to see it differently. A gardener understands seasons, knows that some things must die for others to grow. A gardener is patient, methodical, and understands the deep, intricate root systems that lie beneath the surface. An artist sees what isn't there yet, visualizes a finished piece from a blank canvas. Perhaps those were not weaknesses. Perhaps they were a different kind of strength. The next morning, she didn't choose one of the severe, dark pantsuits her new team had picked out for her. Instead, she chose a dress. It was a simple, elegant maternity dress in a deep forest green, a color that spoke of life and resilience. It wasn't boardroom armor, it was her own. She wore her hair pulled back simply, her only jewelry the thin gold wedding band she had not yet found the strength to remove. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a corporate raider. She saw Isabella Rossi Thorne, a mother, and soon a majority shareholder. Walking into the Thorn Industries boardroom was like stepping into the lion's den. The room was paneled in dark wood, dominated by a monolithic black marble table. 12 men, all in dark suits, were seated around it. They rose stiffly as she entered. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, pity, and barely concealed hostility. The chairman, a man named Robert Wexler, Marcus's longtime friend and mentor, greeted her with a handshake that was cool and brief. "Isabella," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is a difficult time for all of us. We appreciate you coming." The subtext was clear. You don't belong here. She took the seat at the head of the table, the one that had always been Marcus's. It felt too large, the leather cold against her back. The meeting began, a blur of financial reports and strategic overviews. They spoke quickly, using acronyms and insider terms designed to exclude her. They directed their comments to Wexler, pointedly ignoring her presence. Isabella listened. She didn't pretend to understand every nuance, every financial instrument. Instead, she watched. She observed the dynamics, the subtle shifts in posture, the flickers of alliance and rivalry between the men. She saw who deferred to whom, who challenged whom, who stayed silent. She was painting a picture of the room, learning its composition, its light and shadow. Finally, Wexler turned to her, a look of paternalistic condescension on his face. "Isabella, we've drafted a proposal. A trust, managed by the board, that would oversee your shares. It would provide you and your son with a very, very generous income for life. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. We would handle the business as Marcus would have wanted." This was it. The moment they expected her to crumble, to gratefully accept their offer and retreat back to her gilded cage. All eyes were on her. The silence in the room was heavy, expectant. She took a slow breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at each man around the table, meeting their gaze, one by one. "Thank you for your concern, Robert," she began, her voice quieter than they expected, forcing them to lean in to listen. "I'm sure you all believe you know what Marcus would have wanted." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "You see, Marcus, the CEO, the titan, the brilliant strategist, and he was all of those things. But I also knew the man. I knew what he feared. And his greatest fear wasn't a market crash or a failed acquisition. It was insignificance. It was being forgotten." She rested her hands on her belly. "This is his son, his legacy, and I have no intention of entrusting that legacy to a committee who sees him as a balance sheet liability and me as a temporary inconvenience." Her voice grew stronger, imbued with a conviction that surprised even herself. "Marcus built this company on bold moves, on taking risks no one else would. You think playing it safe is what he would have wanted? You think he would want his life's work managed by a board more concerned with protecting their own positions than with genuine innovation?" She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Wexler's. "The proposal is rejected. I will not be sidelined. I will not be bought out. I am the majority shareholder of this company. I will be taking my seat on this board, and I will be voting my shares. There will be changes. Marcus may have built the house, but I am the one who lives here now, and I will be rearranging the furniture." A stunned silence fell over the room. The lions had been momentarily stunned, not by a roar, but by a quiet, unyielding declaration that they had not anticipated. They had expected tears, fear, capitulation. They had not expected a queen to claim her throne. Isabella stood up. "I will expect a full, unredacted report on all current projects and personnel on my desk by tomorrow morning. Thank you for your time, gentlemen." Without a backward glance, she walked out of the boardroom, her head held high. Her legs were trembling, her heart was racing, but she did not let it show. She had survived. More than that, she had fought back. She had worn her own armor, used her own weapons. And as the heavy wooden doors closed behind her, she allowed herself a small, shaky smile. The gardener had just planted a seed of revolution in the heart of the concrete jungle. The hospital became Isabella's second office. While Marcus slept, his recovery slow and frustratingly stagnant, she turned the private suite's sitting area into her command center. Laptops, binders, and encrypted phones replaced floral arrangements and get-well cards. She learned the language of business through total immersion, fueled by caffeine and a fierce, protective instinct that grew with every kick from her unborn son. She read every file, every report, every email chain from the past 5 years. She was not just rearranging the furniture, she was excavating the very foundations of Marcus's empire. And the deeper she dug, the more she realized that Thorn Industries was not the gleaming, impenetrable fortress the world saw. It was a house of cards, built on risky leverage, shadowy deals, and a culture of fear ruthlessly enforced by her husband. She discovered projects that were bleeding money, hidden in shell corporations. She found evidence of consulting fees paid to offshore accounts that looked suspiciously like bribes. She saw a pattern of Marcus bullying partners, crushing smaller competitors, and burning bridges with a reckless arrogance that had left the company with few genuine allies. He had built an empire on intimidation, and its core was rotten. Chloe's words haunted her. "You'll run it into the ground in 6 months." Isabella now saw the terrible truth. The company was already on a trajectory to implode. Marcus's collapse hadn't just been a medical event. It was a metaphor for the state of his entire creation. Her presence at the hospital did not go unnoticed. Nurses would whisper as she passed. A pregnant woman in a green dress, speaking in hushed, urgent tones about derivatives and asset allocation. Board members, forced to report to her, would visit the suite, their faces grim, their briefcases full of bad news they could no longer hide from a new, scrutinizing authority. They treated her with a grudging respect now, but it was laced with resentment. She was the interloper, the cause of all this disruption. One afternoon, Robert Wexler visited. He didn't bring a briefcase, just a weary look in his eyes. He stood by the window, gazing out at the city. "He was always a gambler, you know," Wexler said, his voice heavy. "When we started, we had nothing, just a tiny office and a ridiculous amount of ambition. He'd bet it all on one roll of the dice. Most of the time he won. It made him feel alive." "And when he lost?" Isabella asked, looking up from a spreadsheet that made her head ache. "He'd just find another table, another game. He never knew when to walk away." Wexler turned to face her. "This last deal, the Nakatomi merger, it was too big, too leveraged. I told him it was reckless. He wouldn't listen. He said it would make him a legend." Isabella's blood ran cold. The Nakatomi merger was the company's biggest active project, a massive, multi-billion-dollar deal to acquire a Japanese tech firm. The reports she'd read painted it as a triumph, a game-changer. "What's wrong with the deal?" she asked. Wexler sighed, the sound of a man confessing a long-held sin. "Everything. Their technology is outdated, their patents are about to expire, and their pension fund has a black hole in it the size of a small country. Marcus didn't care. He wanted their distribution network. He was going to buy the company, strip it for parts, and lay off 2/3 of their workforce. The deal is built on a mountain of debt. If it fails, it won't just hurt the company, Isabella. It will bankrupt us." Here it was, the ticking time bomb at the heart of the empire. Marcus hadn't been on the verge of his greatest victory. He'd been on the brink of catastrophic failure. His collapse had been a convenient, perhaps even subconscious, escape. "Why didn't you stop him?" Isabella asked, a hard edge to her voice. Wexler looked away, ashamed. "How? He was Marcus Thorn. And I've made a lot of money standing in his shadow. It's hard to step out of a shadow that's kept you comfortable for 30 years. The confession hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He was as much a part of the problem as Marcus. All of them were. They had enabled him, profited from his recklessness, and were willing to watch him drive the company off a cliff as long as they had their golden parachutes. Just then, a faint groan came from the bed. Isabella and Wexler turned. Marcus's eyes were fluttering open. He blinked slowly, his gaze unfocused, trying to make sense of his surroundings. "Isabella!" he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. Isabella rushed to his side, her heart doing a complicated flip-flop of relief, anger, and a confusing echo of love. "Marcus, you're awake." He tried to sit up, a flicker of his old impatience in his eyes. What happened? The meeting. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the monitors, the IV drip, and finally, Robert Wexler. "Robert, what the hell is going on?" His gaze then fell on the table, covered not in flowers, but in Thorn Industries' financial binders. He looked at Isabella, really looked at her, and a dawning horror spread across his face as memory returned. The lawyer. The codicil. "You," he whispered, the word filled with venom. "This is you. You did this." "You did this to yourself, Marcus," Isabella said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "Get out," he snarled at Wexler, a flash of his old, tyrannical power returning. "Get out." Wexler, looking relieved to escape, practically fled the room. Marcus struggled to pull himself up, ripping at the sensors on his chest. "We had a deal. You were supposed to sign the papers." "The deal changed," Isabella said, standing her ground. The heart monitor began to beep frantically, a piercing, insistent alarm. "You think you can take my company?" he seethed, his face turning a blotchy red. "My life's work? I will destroy you. I will drag you through every court in this country. I will prove you are an unfit mother. You will get nothing. You will have nothing." A team of nurses rushed in, alerted by the alarms. They tried to gently push him back down. "Mr. Thorn, you need to calm down! Your heart!" He fought them, his eyes wild, fixed on Isabella. He looked like a cornered animal, all teeth and fury. And in that moment, Isabella saw him for what he truly was. Not a titan, not a king, but a deeply insecure man whose entire identity was built on power and control. She had taken that from him, and without it, he was nothing. "The doctor said you need to avoid stress, Marcus," Isabella said, her voice unnaturally calm amidst the chaos. "And right now, I am the biggest source of stress in your life." She walked to the door. "So I'll make you a deal. I will run the company. I will fix the mess you made. And in return, you will rest, and you will recover. And you will not fight me. Because if you do," she paused, turning to deliver the final blow, "I will sell it, all of it, piece by piece to the highest bidder, and your legacy, the great Thorn name, will be nothing but a footnote in a business textbook. Rest well, husband." She walked out of the room, leaving him speechless and seething, the frantic beeping of his own broken heart filling the silence. The whispers in the white halls had a new subject now. The quiet, pregnant wife who had just checkmated the king. Chapter 6, The Architect of Ruin. The first order of business was dismantling the Nakatomi merger. It felt like trying to defuse a bomb with one hand while reading the instruction manual in a foreign language with the other. Isabella, flanked by Sarah Jenkins and Maria Sanchez, spent 18-hour days in virtual meetings with lawyers and bankers in Tokyo, New York, and London. The Nakatomi team was hostile, feeling tricked and insulted. The lenders who had financed the deal were threatening lawsuits. The Thorn Industries board was in a state of controlled panic, watching the company's stock price wobble with every rumor that leaked to the press. Isabella discovered her unexpected superpower. She listened. Marcus had always dominated conversations, bulldozing his way to a conclusion. Isabella asked questions. She listened to the Japanese executives speak not just of finances, but of honor, of the loyalty they felt to their long-serving employees who Marcus had planned to discard like old machinery. She listened to the bankers' fears, not just about their money, but about the reputational damage of a collapsed deal. Instead of fighting, she proposed a new kind of deal, not an acquisition, but a partnership. She presented a plan, cobbled together with Maria's help, to invest in Nakatomi's R&D, to merge their distribution networks, and to create a joint venture that would save jobs and create something new. It was a smaller, less flashy, and far more complicated deal. It was a deal based on building, not demolishing. It was during one of these marathon negotiating sessions that Chloe reappeared. She didn't storm in or make a scene. She simply sent a message to Isabella's new executive assistant. "I have information you need. It concerns the Nakatomi deal." They met in a quiet corner of a hotel lobby near the office. Chloe looked different. The sleek, predatory confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle, defensive anger. Her ambition had been her fuel, and without Marcus, her engine had stalled. "Why are you here, Chloe?" Isabella asked, forgoing any pleasantries. "I want what I was promised," Chloe said, her voice low and tense. "A life, a future. He promised me." "He made a lot of promises," Isabella replied dryly. "I can help you," Chloe said, ignoring the jibe. "I know things. I was with him every day for the last 2 years. I sat in on the meetings. I heard the phone calls he thought no one was listening to." Isabella was skeptical. "And you want to share this information out of the goodness of your heart?" A bitter smile touched Chloe's lips. "Don't insult my intelligence. I want a severance package, a generous one. And I want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement that prevents me from ever being associated with Thorn Industries again. I want to be erased from this whole sordid mess." It was a mercenary offer, born of desperation. But Isabella was also desperate. "What do you know?" Chloe leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a conspiratorial light. "Marcus didn't just misjudge the Nakatomi deal. He was set up. Robert Wexler wasn't just enabling him. He was actively feeding him bad information, pushing him toward it." "Why?" Isabella asked, stunned. "Wexler has been with Marcus for 30 years. He's like a father to him." "Wexler is leveraged to the hilt," Chloe explained, the information spilling out of her. "He lost a fortune in a bad real estate deal a few years ago. He's been taking kickbacks from the very bankers who are financing the Nakatomi merger. They have him in their pocket." The plan was simple. Let Marcus push the deal through. Let the company take on the massive debt. And then, when the stock cratered after the truth about Nakatomi came out, Wexler and his banker friends would buy up the shares for pennies on the dollar, push Marcus out, and take over. Marcus's heart attack just accelerated their timeline. The betrayal was staggering, a depth of treachery Isabella could barely comprehend. Wexler, the concerned mentor, the disappointed friend, was the architect of her husband's ruin. He had been playing a long, vicious game, and Marcus had been his willing pawn. "How do you know this?" Isabella asked, her mind reeling. "I found a burner phone," Chloe said. "Marcus was getting paranoid in the last few weeks. He thought someone was leaking information. He asked me to look into it. I found a second phone hidden in his home office. It has copies of texts between Wexler and the lead banker at Sterling Trust. It's all there, the whole plan." Chloe slid a small, slim phone across the table. "Proof. In exchange for my freedom and my future." Isabella stared at the phone. It was the key. The weapon she needed not just to save the company, but to expose the vipers in their own boardroom. But it came at a price. Aligning herself, even temporarily, with her husband's mistress felt like a profound betrayal of her own pain. But this was bigger than her pain. It was about Leo's future. It was about the thousands of employees at Thorn and Nakatomi whose livelihoods were at stake. She had to choose the lesser of two evils. "My lawyer will draw up the agreement," Isabella said, her voice firm. She picked up the phone. "You'll get your money when this is over. And Chloe, I am truly sorry for what he did to you." For the first time, a genuine emotion flickered in Chloe's eyes. Surprise, followed by a flicker of grudging respect. "He was a user, Isabella. He used you for your class and your quiet strength. He used me for my ambition and my ruthlessness. We were just two different tools for the same job. At least you ended up with the whole damn toolbox." With that, Chloe stood up and walked away, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd, a ghost of a future that had never existed. Isabella sat for a moment, the burner phone feeling heavy in her hand. She had thought Marcus was the monster of her story, But she was beginning to realize he was just one of a whole cast of them, and the real villain was the one who had been pretending to be a friend all along. The emergency board meeting was convened under the guise of finalizing the dissolution of the Nakatomi merger. Isabella watched as Robert Wexler entered the room, his face a mask of solemn concern. He offered her a paternalistic nod, the concerned mentor feigning sympathy for the poor, overwhelmed widow-in-waiting. The other board members, the ones in on his scheme, followed his lead. They thought they were coming to a funeral. They had no idea they were walking into an execution. Isabella let them go through the motions. Wexler presented the bleak numbers, the potential lawsuits, the cratering stock price. He painted a picture of a company in crisis, brought to the brink by the reckless ambition of its fallen leader. "It's a tragedy," Wexler concluded, his voice resonating with false gravity. "Marcus reached too far. Now, we, the board, have a responsibility to our shareholders to stabilize the company. It will require drastic measures." He slid a folder across the table toward Isabella. "This is a restructuring proposal. It involves selling off several key divisions to raise capital, and it proposes a new leadership structure, a new CEO, approved by the board, to guide us through this crisis." Isabella didn't open the folder. She knew what it contained, the blueprint for their takeover. "Thank you, Robert," she said, her voice calm and even. The entire room was focused on her. It's a compelling narrative. The tragic hero, the loyal soldiers left to pick up the pieces. It's almost Shakespearean. She stood up and walked to the large screen at the end of the room. She plugged a small flash drive, containing the contents of the burner phone, into the port. "But I find myself drawn to a different story," she continued, as the screen flickered to life. "A story of betrayal, a story about a man so consumed by greed and resentment that he would conspire to destroy his friend of 30 years and the company they built together." A series of text messages appeared on the screen, projected for everyone to see. Dates, times, incriminating phrases. "He's taking the bait. The Nakatomi financials look just convincing enough. The banks are ready. Once the deal closes, the debt leverage will be unsustainable. When the stock hits $5, we buy. The board is with us. He'll be out by Christmas." A collective gasp went through the room. The conspirators, 3 other board members besides Wexler, went pale. The others stared in stunned disbelief. Wexler leaped to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is fabricated! It's slander! You can't prove a thing!" "Can't I?" Isabella said, her voice dropping to an icy calm. "This is from a secondary phone you were using to communicate with Mark Landis at Sterling Trust. The phone is currently in the possession of the SEC, along with a sworn affidavit from your accomplice, detailing the entire scheme." She was bluffing about the affidavit, but in the chaos, it didn't matter. "My accomplice?" Wexler sputtered. "Chloe Vance," Isabella said, letting the name land like a grenade. "She was far more observant than you or Marcus ever gave her credit for. It seems my husband's paranoia was justified, even if it was misdirected." Wexler stared at her, his composure utterly shattered. He saw the truth in her eyes, the cold, hard certainty of his own destruction. He had underestimated her, just as Marcus had. He saw a pregnant woman in a green dress and missed the warrior beneath. "The 4 of you," Isabella said, her gaze sweeping over Wexler and his co-conspirators, "will tender your resignations, effective immediately. You will forfeit your severance and any outstanding stock options. If you do not, I will not only proceed with this evidence in a civil suit that will bankrupt you, but I will also hand it over to the district attorney's office. I believe they have a keen interest in cases of market manipulation and corporate fraud." It was a gambit worthy of Marcus himself, a move of total, scorched earth aggression. But where his had been born of ego, hers was born of necessity. The 4 men looked at each other, their alliance dissolving into panic and mutual accusation. There was no escape. She had them trapped. One by one they slumped in their chairs, defeated. "Now," Isabella said, turning to the remaining shell-shocked members of the board. Let's talk about the future of Thorn Industries. Our real future. For the next hour, she laid out her vision. Not Marcus's vision of endless, ruthless expansion, but a new one. She spoke of the partnership with Nakatomi, of sustainable growth, of investing in their employees, of rebuilding the company's toxic culture from the ground up. She spoke with a passion and clarity that stunned them. This wasn't the quiet, decorative wife they knew. This was a leader. When she finished, the room was silent. Then, one of the oldest members, a man who had often clashed with Marcus, began to clap. Slowly, hesitantly, the others joined in. It wasn't a thunderous ovation, but it was a beginning. It was a vote of confidence. Isabella walked out of the boardroom and into the waiting car, her body trembling with adrenaline. She had done it. She had faced the lions in their den and emerged not just unscathed, but as the leader of the pack. When she arrived back at the hospital, she found Marcus sitting up in a chair by the window, staring out at the city. He was dressed in a robe, looking thinner and older. The fire was gone from his eyes, replaced by a hollowed-out emptiness. He had heard the news. Of course he had. The resignations would be all over the financial news networks. "Wexler," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "After all these years, he was the one." "Yes," Isabella said softly. He turned to look at her, a complicated, unreadable expression on his face. It was a mixture of awe, resentment, and a grudging, painful respect. "You beat them. You beat them all." "I saved our son's legacy," she corrected him. "The one you were about to gamble away." He flinched, the truth of her words hitting him with physical force. He had no defense, no counter-argument. He had been so obsessed with winning his petty games that he hadn't seen the real threat, the one sitting right beside him, patting him on the back as he led him to the slaughter. "What now, Isabella?" he asked, the question sounding like a plea. "Now," she said, placing a hand on her belly, where Leo kicked, strong and steady. "We redefine the terms of our partnership." The divorce papers were still unsigned. The game had a few more moves left to play. The weeks that followed were a strange détente. Marcus was discharged from the hospital, a humbled, diminished version of his former self. The doctor's orders were strict. Months of recovery, no stress, no work. He was a king without a kingdom, a general with no army, confined to the guest suite of the townhouse that was no longer truly his. Isabella, in contrast, was coming into her power. She was no longer just the acting head of Thorn Industries, she was its architect. She finalized the partnership with Nakatomi, a move that was praised by the market as innovative and forward-thinking. She began the slow, arduous process of changing the company culture, promoting from within, establishing transparency, and cutting away the dead wood of Marcus's yes men. They lived as ghosts in the same house, their interactions brief and stilted. They were husband and wife only on paper. The intimacy they once shared was a distant country to which neither had a passport. Isabella would see him sometimes, sitting in the garden he'd designed but never had time to enjoy, staring blankly at the roses. The fight was gone, replaced by a profound, weary emptiness. He had lost everything that defined him: his company, his power, his mistress, and the respect of his wife. One evening, she found him in the half-finished nursery. He was standing in front of the mural of elephants and stars, his hand resting gently on the painted wall. "I remember when you started this," he said, his voice quiet, almost unrecognizable. "You were so happy." "I was," she said, standing in the doorway. He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a deep, bottomless regret. "I was a fool, Isabella. I had everything that mattered. And I threw it away for what? For more. For the thrill of the win. For a woman who was just a younger, sharper reflection of my own ambition." "I know," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. "The codicil," he said, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. I wrote it to prove I would never betray you. I made it so absolute, so destructive, because in my arrogance I couldn't imagine a world where I would. I built my own prison, didn't I? We both lived in it, Marcus, she replied. It just had a better view for you. He finally looked at her. Truly looked at her. Not as an accessory or a possession, but as the woman who had outplayed him, the woman who held his entire world in her hands. What do you want, Isabella? He asked, his voice raw with surrender. The divorce? You can have it. You can have everything. Just tell me what you want. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment of his total capitulation. She could take it all. She could erase him, just as he had planned to erase her. She could walk away with the company, the money, and their son, and start a new life, free from the wreckage of their marriage. But as she looked at him, she didn't feel the triumph she had expected. She just felt a profound sadness for the man he could have been, for the love they had lost. And she thought of Leo. What would she tell him one day? That his father was a monster she had vanquished? Or that he was a flawed, broken man who had made terrible mistakes? I don't want to destroy you, Marcus, she said, her voice softer than she intended. That was never my goal. That was always your game. She walked into the room, closing the distance between them. The divorce papers are still in Mr. Abernathy's office. They remain unsigned. For now, he looked at her confused. What are you saying? I am saying that our son deserves a father. Not a ghost haunting the guest wing, not a cautionary tale. A father. She took a deep breath, the words tasting strange and new on her tongue. I am offering you a new deal, a different kind of partnership. You will have no part in the company, she stated, her terms clear and non-negotiable. That is mine. You will sign over your remaining shares to a trust for Leo, which I will manage until he comes of age. You will have a generous allowance, but your fortune, the one you built, is no longer yours. He nodded, accepting the terms without a fight. This was the easy part. But, she continued, you will have a role, a purpose. You will be a father to our son. You will be here. You will change diapers. You will soothe his cries. You will read him bedtime stories. You will teach him how to be a man. Not the man you were, but the man you could have been. The one who loves poetry and sunsets on the Amalfi Coast. Tears welled in Marcus's eyes, the first genuine emotion she had seen from him since this nightmare began. He was being offered not a reprieve, but a chance at redemption. A path back not to power, but to humanity. You will earn your place in his life, Marcus. You will earn your place in this family. And maybe one day you will earn my forgiveness. She paused. Those are my terms. That is my price for not signing the papers. He didn't speak for a long time. He simply looked at her, at the incredible, unexpected grace she was offering him. He had tried to give her a lump sum to disappear. She was giving him a chance to find his soul. Yes, he finally whispered, the word thick with unshed tears. Isabella, yes. It was not an absolution. It was not a reconciliation. The trust between them was shattered, perhaps irrevocably. But it was a beginning, a fragile, uncertain truce in the ashes of their war. She was giving him the one thing he had never known how to value, a second chance. And as he reached out, not to touch her, but as a gesture of acknowledgement, a silent acceptance of her terms, Isabella knew that the hardest part of her journey was just beginning. She had won the battle for the company, but the fight to rebuild a family, to forgive the unforgivable, would be the work of a lifetime. The story of Isabella and Marcus is a testament to the fact that the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to the most unexpected transformations. From the brink of being erased, Isabella discovered a strength she never knew she had, proving that true power isn't about control, but about resilience and the courage to rewrite the rules. Their journey is far from over, a complex path of forgiveness and redemption that they must walk every day. What do you think will happen next? Can a love so broken ever truly be mended? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Isabella's story, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice and unexpected twists. What if the fairy tale was a carefully constructed cage? What if the man who promised you forever was the architect of your greatest nightmare? For Mira Caldwell, her life was perfect. A loving millionaire husband, a beautiful home, and a baby on the way. But one cold autumn day, her perfect husband, Damien, drove her to an abandoned, rotting house in the middle of nowhere and left her. Pregnant, alone, with nothing. He told her she was a liability he had to erase, but he underestimated the woman he betrayed. This isn't just a story of survival, it's a story of how a woman, left with nothing, rebuilt an empire from the ashes of a lie and stunned everyone who wrote her off. The lie, Mira Caldwell would later realize, was crafted with the same meticulous precision as the architectural marvels she so admired. It was in the gentle curve of Damien Rothwell's smile, the reassuring weight of his hand on the small of her back, and the hushed, earnest promises he'd whisper into her hair as they stood on the balcony of their Seattle penthouse, overlooking the glittering expanse of Puget Sound. Their life was a masterpiece of modern romance. Damien, the charismatic heir to the Rothwell development empire, was a man who seemed to command the world with an effortless grace. He'd met Mira, a brilliant but unassuming historical restoration architect, at a city planning gala. She was there to accept a minor award for her work on a pre-war library. He was the event's primary sponsor. He'd been captivated, he said, by the passion in her voice as she spoke of breathing life back into forgotten things. "You see the soul in buildings, Mira," he'd told her on their third date, his deep blue eyes reflecting the city lights. "Most people just see brick and steel." She fell for him, not for the Rothwell name or the vertiginous wealth, but for the man who seemed to see her. He celebrated her intellect, funded a small pro bono project she was passionate about, and made her feel like the center of his universe. Within a year, they were married. Within 2, she was pregnant. The first hint of a crack in the gilded facade appeared subtly. It was a tension that entered the room whenever his father, Victor Rothwell, was mentioned. Victor was the family patriarch, a man carved from granite and ambition, whose approval Damien seemed to crave with a desperate, boyish hunger. Mira had met him only a handful of times. He was polite, his smile a thin, bloodless line, his eyes assessing her as if she were a line item on a balance sheet that didn't quite add up. "He's from a different generation, Mira," Damien would explain away his father's coldness. "He doesn't understand marrying for this." He would gesture between them, a look of such genuine love on his face that her doubts would melt away. The day the lie began to unravel started as a promise. Mira was 6 months pregnant, the gentle swell of her belly a constant, joyful reminder of the new life they were creating. Damien burst into her home office, his face alight with an infectious excitement. "Pack a weekend bag, my love," he announced, scooping her into his arms. "I have a surprise for you, for us." "A surprise? Damien, I have that consultation on the Pioneer Square project tomorrow." "Cancelled it," he said with a wave of his hand. "This is more important. It's about our future, our family's real start." The drive was long, winding away from the familiar comfort of Seattle, deep into the Cascade foothills. The autumn scenery was breathtaking, a riot of crimson and gold under a steel-gray sky, but a strange unease began to prickle at Mira's skin. Damien was unusually quiet, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of his sleek black sedan. "Where are we going, really?" she asked, placing a hand on his arm. He flinched, just for a second. "You'll see," he said, his voice flatter than before. "It's a place I've bought. A project for you, maybe. A place for us to escape to. It's rustic." They turned off the main highway onto a gravel road, the car jostling as it navigated deep ruts. The towering pines closed in around them, swallowing the daylight. After another 15 minutes, he pulled to a stop. Before them stood a house, but it wasn't the charmingly rustic cabin Mira had imagined. It was a skeletal ruin, a 2-story Victorian farmhouse, probably once beautiful, now stood in a state of terminal decay. The porch sagged, windows were boarded up or shattered into jagged teeth, and the paint had peeled away to reveal rotting, gray wood. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. "Damien? What is this?" Mira's voice was a whisper. The unease had blossomed into a cold dread coiling in her stomach. He got out of the car, his movements stiff and unnatural. "This is it, the surprise." He walked her towards the derelict building, his hand no longer reassuring, but a firm, guiding pressure. He led her onto the groaning porch, the wood protesting under their weight. He pushed open the front door, which hung crookedly on a single hinge. Inside, the gloom was absolute. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light piercing the boarded windows. The smell of mildew and animal droppings was overpowering. "I don't understand," she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned to look at him. The man standing before her was a stranger. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a terrifying emptiness. The charming smile was a tight, grim line. "Victor was right," Damien said, his voice hollow. "He told me from the beginning. You're a distraction, a sentimental folly I couldn't afford." What are you talking about?" Mira backed away, her hand flying instinctively to her belly. "Damien, you're scaring me." "There's a clause in the family trust," he continued as if reciting a speech. "A morality and legacy clause. The primary heir must be in a union that strengthens the Rothwell brand. Someone from a suitable background. Your background, your absolute lack of lineage, was a problem. Tolerable, perhaps. But a child?" He shook his head, a flicker of something. Was it regret? Or just irritation? Crossing his face. "A child with you solidifies the mistake. It makes you a permanent liability. It dilutes the Rothwell legacy." The words were like stones, each one hitting her with a brutal, physical force. "A liability, our baby. A liability? This was the only way," he said, his gaze flicking around the decaying room. "You disappear. You and the problem you're carrying. Everyone thinks you're on a wellness retreat before the birth. In a few months, I'll announce that you decided to leave me, that you wanted a different life. It will be tragic. I will be the grieving husband." Tears were streaming down Mira's face now, hot and silent. "You're leaving me here? In this place? The house and the 10 acres it sits on are in your name. A parting gift," he said, his voice laced with a bitter irony. He reached into his pocket and pulled out her phone, tossing it onto a dusty, collapsed armchair. "The battery's dead. There's no service out here anyway. The nearest town is Oak Haven, about a 12-mile walk. But I wouldn't recommend it. They're not exactly welcoming to outsiders." He turned to leave. "Damien, please!" she sobbed, grabbing for his arm. "Please, don't do this. Think of our child. Your child. I love you." He ripped his arm from her grasp, his face contorting in a mask of cold fury. "Love? You love the idea of me, the comfort, the money. This is business, Mira. You were a bad investment. Now, I'm cutting my losses." He walked out, not looking back. Mira stumbled after him, her feet catching on the warped floorboards. She reached the porch just in time to see the sleek black sedan's taillights disappear down the overgrown drive. The sound of the engine faded, replaced by the chilling whisper of the wind through the broken house and the frantic, terrified thumping of her own heart. She was alone, pregnant, abandoned. The entire world she had known, the love she had believed in, was a lie. And as the first drops of a cold, merciless rain began to fall, Mira Caldwell sank to her knees on the rotting porch of her new home and wept. The first 24 hours were a blur of shock and primal fear. The cold seeped into Mira's bones, a damp, insidious chill that no amount of shivering could ward off. As dusk bled into a starless, oppressive night, the house came alive with unfamiliar sounds, the skittering of unseen creatures in the walls, the mournful groan of settling timber, the relentless drumming of rain on the leaky roof. Every shadow held a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like Damien's car returning, a hope so sharp and painful that its constant disappointment was its own form of torture. She huddled in the least exposed corner of the main room, wrapping her arms around her belly, whispering promises to the unborn child who was her only companion in the suffocating darkness. "I'll keep you safe," she murmured over and over, the words a desperate mantra against the rising tide of despair. "I'll keep us safe." By dawn, something shifted. The raw, paralyzing terror began to recede, leaving behind the hard, cold bedrock of reality. Damien wasn't coming back. No one was. Weeping wouldn't fix a single broken window or light a single fire. Her tears wouldn't feed her, or her baby. Her architectural training, the part of her Damien had claimed to admire, kicked in. It was a lifeline. She stopped seeing the house as a tomb and started seeing it as a structure. A problem to be solved. Her first priority was a methodical assessment. With the weak morning light filtering through the grime, she began to explore her prison. The ground floor was a wreck of collapsed furniture and debris, but the kitchen, at the back of the house, was marginally better. It had a huge, cast-iron wood-burning stove, ancient and rusted, but its flue pipe seemed mostly intact. A quick, hopeful search of the attached pantry revealed nothing but cobwebs and mouse droppings. Upstairs, 2 of the 4 bedrooms were impassable, their floors having rotted through. But one, a small room overlooking the back of the property, was relatively secure. The window was shattered, but the frame was solid. The floor felt sturdy. Most importantly, it had a fireplace. Survival became a series of small, achievable goals. First, shelter. Using a broken floorboard as a pry bar, she wrenched the boards from the window of the small bedroom. It was exhausting work, her muscles screaming in protest, her pregnant body clumsy and aching. She stuffed the gaping hole with her now useless designer suitcase and an old, mildewed mattress she dragged from another room. It was crude, but it blocked the wind. Next, fire. The house itself provided the fuel. She broke apart a fallen cabinet, the dry, brittle wood snapping easily. In a forgotten kitchen drawer, caked in decades of grime, she found a miracle, a small tin box containing a handful of waterproof matches. Her hands trembled as she struck the first one. When the kindling caught and a small, brave flame flickered to life in the fireplace, she cried. Not tears of despair this time, but of a fierce, defiant victory. The warmth was life itself. It pushed back the damp and the dark, creating a small bubble of safety in the vast wilderness of her abandonment. Days bled into a week. Mira's existence narrowed to a primitive rhythm. Wake, find fuel, find water, secure shelter. She discovered a hand pump well behind the house. The water that came sputtering out was rusty at first, but after an hour of determined pumping, it ran clear. She boiled it vigorously on a makeshift grill she fashioned over the fireplace. Food was the most pressing problem. She was getting weaker, the hunger a constant gnawing ache. She remembered Damien's parting words. Oakhaven, a 12-mile walk. The thought of that trek was daunting, but starvation was a more immediate threat. Steeling herself, she decided to try. She packed nothing, wanting to be as light as possible, and started down the gravel drive. The walk was brutal. The road was uneven, and her city shoes were not meant for the terrain. After what felt like hours, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Her vision swam, and she had to sit down, her body trembling with exhaustion. She couldn't do it. Not in her condition. Defeated, she trudged back to the house. That night, huddled by the fire, she discovered the second miracle. Tucked away on a high shelf in a dusty closet was a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with the elegant, spidery script of a woman named Abigail Hawthorne, who had lived in the house in the 1930s. Abigail's diary wasn't just a record of her life, it was a manual for it. She wrote of tending her garden, of the wild edibles that grew in the woods, of canning and preserving. She described the location of a hidden root cellar beneath the kitchen floorboards. With renewed purpose, Mira found the loose floorboard Abigail described. The cellar was small and musty, but inside were treasures. Dusty glass jars filled with what looked like pickled vegetables and preserved fruits, and a small sack of withered but edible potatoes. It wasn't much, but it was food. It was time. As she ate a boiled potato, the most delicious thing she had ever tasted, she read more of Abigail's journal. The woman wrote of her husband, who built the house with his own hands, and of her own quiet strength and resilience through harsh winters and lonely seasons. "This house is not just wood and nails," Abigail wrote. "It is a testament. It stands because we willed it to." In Abigail Hawthorne, Mira found a kindred spirit across the decades, a woman who had also found her strength in isolation, whose love for this place was tangible. Mira began to talk to her, whispering her fears and her small triumphs to the silent pages. The house was no longer just a prison. It was becoming a partner in her survival. She learned its rhythms, its strengths, its weaknesses. She patched the roof above her room with salvaged shingles. She used Abigail's descriptions to identify edible mushrooms and hardy greens growing near the wood's edge. One crisp afternoon, while clearing debris from the front porch, she saw it. A plume of smoke rising from a valley miles away. Oakhaven. A real town. People. The sight sent a jolt through her, a mixture of fear and a desperate, aching loneliness. A few days later, a battered-looking pickup truck rumbled up her drive. It was the first vehicle she'd seen since Damien left. Her heart leapt into her throat. She darted inside, grabbing a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, her body tense. A man got out of the truck. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 40s, with a weathered face and kind, tired eyes. He wore a flannel shirt and work boots. He stopped at the edge of the porch, his gaze taking in the broken steps and Mira's wary face peering from the doorway. "Ma'am?" he called out, his voice calm and unthreatening. "Name's Jack Holloway. I own the hardware store down in Oakhaven. Saw the smoke from your chimney the other day. Folks got a little worried. No one's lived in the old Hawthorne place for 50 years. Mira didn't move. She clutched the poker tighter. "I'm fine." Jack's eyes softened with concern. He saw her ragged clothes, the soot on her face, and quite clearly, the unmistakable swell of her pregnancy. "With all due respect, ma'am, you don't look fine," he said gently. "Is there someone I can call for you? Your husband?" The word husband was a fresh wound. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "No, there's no one." Jack seemed to weigh his next words carefully. "Look, I'm not here to bother you, but it's getting cold. Winter in these parts is no joke. You and the little one. You can't stay here like this." He wasn't demanding. He wasn't pitying. He was just stating a fact. For the first time in weeks, she was looking at another human being who wasn't trying to erase her. "I don't have any money," she said, the admission costing her a shard of her pride. "Didn't ask for any," he replied, nodding slowly. He gestured back to his truck. "I brought some things. A couple of tarps for your roof, some canned goods, a quart of firewood. Just a welcome to the neighborhood, I guess. You can take 'em or leave 'em." He began to unload the supplies, placing them carefully at the bottom of the porch steps, never trying to get closer. He worked in a comfortable silence. When he was done, he gave her a small, respectful nod. "If you need anything else, my store's in town. Holloway's Hardware, can't miss it." He got back in his truck and drove away, leaving Mira standing in the doorway, the iron poker hanging limp in her hand. She looked at the neat stack of supplies: food, wood, and tools for repair. It was an offering of simple, uncomplicated kindness. That night, as a real fire from dry, seasoned wood blazed in her fireplace, warming her small, secure room, Mira Caldwell ate a can of thick, hearty beef stew. It was a gift from a stranger, and as she looked around at the fortress she had started to build, she realized the embers of her old life were dead. But here, in the ruins, something new was beginning to glow. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was the first flicker of a fight. The arrival of Jack Holloway was a turning point. His quiet act of charity cracked open the shell of isolation Mira had built around herself. While still wary, she recognized that she couldn't do everything alone. The coming winter was a formidable enemy, and her advancing pregnancy was a ticking clock. She began a new routine. By day, she worked on the house with a feverish intensity, using the tools Jack had left. The tarps went over the leakiest sections of the roof. She boarded up the remaining broken windows on the ground floor, making the house more secure. Her architectural knowledge was no longer theoretical. It was about load-bearing walls, insulation, and the physics of heat retention. She was a different kind of architect now, building not for aesthetics, but for life itself. By night, she devoured Abigail Hawthorne's journal. It became her Bible. But she also found something else tucked within its pages, a collection of old documents. Folded and brittle with age, they were property deeds, survey maps from the 1920s, and a series of letters between Abigail's husband, Samuel Hawthorne, and a Seattle-based geologist. At first, Mira scanned them with mild curiosity. But then, a name jumped out at her, written in the geologist's formal hand: Rothwell Mining and Exploration. It was the original name of the company that had evolved into Damien's family empire. Her blood ran cold. The letters detailed a survey of the Hawthorne property. The geologist spoke of a significant aquifer, a massive underground reservoir of pure, clean water. But more than that, he mentioned traces of rare earth minerals in the bedrock, minerals that were of little commercial value in the 1930s, but were now essential components in high-end electronics and batteries. "Mr. Rothwell is most insistent," one letter read. "He has offered us a pittance for the land, claiming it worthless. But he knows what lies beneath. Samuel, I urge you not to sell. This land is your family's legacy." Samuel Hawthorne had refused to sell. The Rothwell family, it seemed, had a long history of trying to acquire this specific plot of land, and they had failed. Suddenly, Damien's actions took on a new, more sinister dimension. He hadn't just dumped her on a random worthless property. He had stranded her on the one piece of land his family had coveted for nearly a century. The parting gift was a cruel joke. He'd left her to die on a fortune, assuming she'd never be smart enough or strong enough to realize it. He probably planned to reclaim the land from her estate after she and the baby had perished over the winter. The rage that filled her was a clean, white-hot flame. It burned away the last vestiges of the victim she had been. He hadn't just betrayed her as a wife, he had fundamentally misjudged her as a person. He saw a liability. He had no idea he'd created an adversary. Her trips to Oakhaven became a necessity. She saved the fuel from Jack's chainsaw to make the 12-mile journey once a week in an old, rickety garden tractor she'd found and repaired in the barn. Oakhaven was a town that time had bruised, but not broken. Its main street was lined with brick buildings, some empty, some holding on. The people were reserved, their curiosity about the pregnant woman from the Hawthorne place masked by a polite distance. Her first stop was always Holloway's Hardware. Jack never pried, but he always had a hot cup of coffee waiting for her. He'd trade her supplies for the odd jobs she could do, using her drafting skills to sketch out a renovation plan for another shop owner, or rewiring a faulty lamp with the steady hands of a detail-oriented professional. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Mira," he said one afternoon, watching her neatly sketch a new layout for the town's struggling bakery. "I had to grow one quickly," she replied without looking up. Through Jack, she began to integrate into the town's fabric. She learned that Oakhaven was dying a slow death. Its main source of water was a municipal well that was becoming increasingly unreliable, and the town council couldn't afford the surveys needed to find a new source. Young people were leaving for jobs in the city. It was a town full of people who felt as abandoned as she did. An idea began to form in her mind, audacious and terrifying, but rooted in the knowledge she now possessed. She needed an ally, someone who understood the world she'd been cast out from. She remembered Damien mentioning an estranged aunt, Celeste Rothwell. He'd spoken of her with contempt. A bleeding heart artist, he'd called her, turned her back on the family to marry some poet in Vermont. It was a long shot. Mira used the town library's ancient computer to find a phone number. Her hands shook as she dialed. "Celeste Rothwell speaking." The voice was warm, cultured. "My name is Mira Caldwell," Mira began, her own voice unsteady. I was married to your nephew, Damien." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Was? My dear girl, what's happened? Victor told us you were unwell, that you'd gone abroad." The lie was even bigger than she'd thought. Taking a deep breath, Mira told her everything. The pregnancy, the abandoned house, the Rothwell family's century-long obsession with the land. She spoke with a calm, chilling clarity. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then Celeste's voice came back, laced with a fury that mirrored Mira's own. "That man, my brother, he is a monster, and he has turned his own son into one." She paused. "Mira, what do you need?" "Information," Mira said, "and a lawyer. A very, very good one who isn't afraid of your brother." Celeste didn't hesitate. "You'll have him by the end of the day. And I'll have my private investigator dig into Victor's current dealings. If he's making a play for that land, he'll have left a trail." The alliance was forged. With Celeste's backing, a high-powered, discreet lawyer named Marcus Thorne began working for Mira. He confirmed her ownership of the Hawthorne property was ironclad. He also started preparing the necessary paperwork to officially survey and register the water and mineral rights. Back in Oakhaven, Mira made her move. She called a town meeting. It was held in the drafty town hall, the room packed with curious and skeptical faces. Jack Holloway stood at the back, his arms crossed, a look of quiet support on his face. Mira, now visibly pregnant, stood before them. She was no longer the frightened woman Jack had found. She was poised, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Mira Caldwell, and I am the new owner of the Hawthorne property," she began. "I know this town is facing challenges. I know your water supply is failing." She unrolled one of Samuel Hawthorne's old survey maps and laid it on the table. "This map shows a massive aquifer located directly beneath my land. It's clean, it's vast, and it's sustainable." A murmur went through the crowd. "My lawyers have confirmed my legal right to this water," she continued, her eyes sweeping across the room. "I could sell these rights to a bottling company from Seattle for millions. I could let them drain this valley dry and leave you with even less than you have now." She let that sink in. The faces in front of her were tense. "But that's not what I'm going to do," she said, her voice softening. "I came here with nothing. I was left here to be erased. But this place, and some of the people in it, saved me." Her eyes met Jack's for a fleeting moment. "This land's legacy isn't about money. It's about sustenance. It's about community." She took a deep breath. "I want to create a town trust. We will tap the aquifer not to sell, but to secure Oakhaven's water supply for the next 100 years. We will use the access to a secure water source to apply for state grants, to bring in new, sustainable businesses. We will use the clay deposits on the land to restart the old brickworks. We will rebuild this town together," she finished, her heart pounding. The hall was silent. Then an old farmer in the front row stood up. "Why? Why would you do that for us?" Mira placed a hand on her stomach. "Because I'm not just building a future for myself," she said. "I'm building one for my child. And I want her to be born into a world where people help each other, not abandon each other. I want her to grow up in a place that knows its own worth." The silence was broken by one person clapping. It was Jack. Then another joined in, and another, until the entire hall was filled with thunderous applause. In that moment, Mira wasn't just the strange woman from the Hawthorne place anymore. She was their hope. From her crumbling fortress, Mira had laid the foundations of an empire, not of money and power, but of community and resilience. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that the storm was coming. Damien and his father would find out, but this time, she would be ready. She wasn't just defending a house anymore. She was defending a home. The news of Mira's survival and subsequent actions rippled out from Oakhaven, slowly at first, then with the force of a tidal wave. It reached Seattle not as a whisper, but as a formal legal notice served to Rothwell Development. The notice, delivered by Marcus Thorne's firm, was a petition to formally register the water and mineral rights of the Hawthorne property under the newly formed Oakhaven Community Trust, of which Mira Caldwell was the director. For Damien Rothwell, the document was a ghost appearing in his boardroom. He'd spent the last few months cultivating the fiction of the grieving husband. He'd attended galas with a somber air, accepted condolences with practiced sorrow, and solidified his position as his father's sole, loyal heir. He had, with brutal efficiency, compartmentalized his betrayal. Mira was a ghost, a memory he was actively erasing. But here she was, not just alive, but organized, powerful. The name Oakhaven Community Trust was an act of defiance so profound it made him physically ill. The summons from his father was immediate. Damien walked into Victor Rothwell's cavernous, mahogany-paneled office, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal. Victor sat behind his massive desk, the legal notice spread before him like an indictment. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was infinitely worse. "Explain this," Victor said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You told me the liability was neutralized. I left her there, with nothing. The house is a death trap. I don't understand how she could have—" Damien's voice trailed off. He sounded weak, even to his own ears. "You don't understand?" Victor's hand slapped the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You understand that you failed. You were tasked with a simple, unpleasant, but necessary task. And you failed. You underestimated her. You let your sentimentality, the very flaw I have tried to beat out of you your entire life, cloud your judgment. You thought leaving her on that property was a clever, poetic bit of cruelty. It was, in fact, moronically stupid. You handed our enemy the one weapon that can be used against us. Enemy? She's my wife!" The words were out before Damien could stop them. Victor rose, his towering frame casting a long shadow over his son. "She is the holder of the Hawthorne land, the one piece of real estate my own grandfather failed to acquire, the land that holds not just water, but enough tellurium and neodymium to make us a key supplier for the next generation of energy tech. I have been discreetly trying to acquire it through shell corporations for years, waiting for the right moment. And you delivered it, gift-wrapped, to a woman who now has every reason in the world to destroy us." Damien sank into a chair, the full scope of his blunder crashing down on him. The guilt he had suppressed for months returned with a vengeance, sharp and suffocating. He saw Mira's face in his mind, her trusting eyes, her joy at the news of her pregnancy, the utter devastation as he drove away. "Clean it up, Damien," Victor commanded, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. Go back there. Offer her money. A lot of money. Whatever it takes. Appeal to her maternal instinct. Remind her of what you once had. Use any weakness you can find. And if she refuses, you will remind her just how vulnerable a single woman with a baby can be. Do you understand me? The drive back to Oakhaven was a journey into Damien's own personal hell. The autumn leaves were gone, replaced by the stark, bare branches of early winter. The landscape was as bleak as his soul. He wasn't the confident master of the universe who had driven this road months ago. He was a man haunted by his own cowardice, sent to do the bidding of a father he both feared and despised. He arrived in Oakhaven to find a town transformed. The air buzzed with a newfound energy. The bakery had a new coat of paint and a "Now Hiring" sign in the window. The main street was cleaner. He saw people talking in small groups, their expressions animated with purpose, not despair. This was her doing. He drove up the familiar gravel road to the Hawthorne house. He expected to find the same ruin, perhaps with a few crude patches. Instead, he stopped the car in stunned silence. The house was a work in progress, but the progress was staggering. The sagging porch had been stabilized with new timber supports. The shattered windows on the ground floor had been replaced with new panes that glinted in the winter sun. A neat stack of freshly cut firewood stood by the door. Smoke curled from both the main chimney and the one for the kitchen stove. It looked alive. As he got out of the car, the front door opened. Mira stood there. She was 7 months pregnant, her belly a proud, defiant sphere under a simple wool sweater. Her face was thinner, etched with lines of hardship he'd put there, but her eyes held a strength he had never seen before. There was no fear in them. No tears. Only a calm, steady fire. She wasn't alone. Jack Holloway came to stand beside her, his presence a silent, solid statement of protection. "Damien," Mira said, her voice even. "I wondered when you or your father would show up." "Mira," he began, the name feeling like ash in his mouth. "We need to talk." "I think you've said everything you needed to say," she replied, not moving from the doorway. "Please, let me explain." He took a step forward, but stopped when Jack shifted his weight. "There's nothing to explain, Damien," Mira said. "You made a business decision. You cut your losses. I was a bad investment. Those were your words, weren't they?" He flinched. "It was my father. He pressured me. I didn't know what else to do." A dry, mirthless laugh escaped her. "You always have a choice, Damien. You chose ambition. You chose your father's approval. You chose to leave your pregnant wife in a derelict house to die. That's a choice you have to live with." Desperation clawed at him. "Mira, I can fix this. I'll give you anything. A settlement? $10 million? 20? A trust for the child? You can live anywhere in the world, comfortably. Just sign the land back over to me." This was the moment. The confrontation she had been preparing for. She stepped forward onto the porch, her gaze unwavering. "Let me tell you what's going to happen, Damien," she said, her voice resonating with a power that stunned him. "The Oakhaven Community Trust will control the water rights. We're going to rebuild this town. We're going to create jobs and a future here. As for the mineral rights, my lawyer, Marcus Thorne, I'm sure your father knows the name, is currently in negotiations. Not with Rothwell Development, with your biggest competitor, Nakatomi Innovations. They seem to think that partnering with a community-led trust is excellent PR. And they pay fairly." Damien's face went white. Nakatomi was their fiercest rival. A deal like that wouldn't just be a loss, it would be a humiliation. "You can't," he stammered. "That's family legacy. You gave up the right to talk to me about family or legacy when you called your own child a liability," she shot back, her voice like steel. She took another step closer, until they were only a few feet apart. "You see, you and your father made a critical error. You thought this land was valuable because of what's underneath it. But you were wrong. Its real value is in what it can build on the surface. A community. Hope. Something your money can't buy and your threats can't break. From behind him, the purr of another luxury sedan announced a new arrival. A black car, identical to Damien's, pulled up. Victor Rothwell emerged, his face a thundercloud. He had clearly followed his son, trusting him to handle nothing. He strode towards the porch, his eyes ignoring Damien and fixing on Mira. "Enough of these games, girl. Name your price. Every person has one." Mira looked from the fearsome patriarch to his cowed son, and she smiled. A real, genuine smile of pure, unadulterated power. "You're right, Victor," she said calmly. "I do have a price. It's just not one you can pay." She placed a hand on her belly. "I want my child to grow up free of the Rothwell name and the poison that comes with it. I want Damien to sign away all parental rights, permanently and irrevocably." Damien looked as if she had struck him. "Mira, no." "And," she continued, her eyes locking with Victor's, "I want a full, public confession from Rothwell Development about the illegal and predatory tactics you've used for decades to try and acquire this land, complete with an endowment to a state environmental protection fund. That's my price. The truth." Victor's face contorted with rage. "You are in no position to make demands." "Oh, but I am," Mira said, holding her ground. "Because if you refuse, the story of what you did to me, what you had your son do to me, goes public. Not as a rumor, but as a verified, documented account, complete with interviews from the people of this town, a statement from your own sister, Celeste, and a pending lawsuit that will tie your company up in legal knots for years. Your stock will plummet, your brand will be ruined, and your legacy will be one of cruelty and greed. So you see, you can give me what I want, or I will take everything you have." She stood there, on the porch of the house that was meant to be her grave, a pregnant woman in a simple sweater, and held the future of the entire Rothwell empire in her hands. She was not a liability. She was the reckoning. Damien looked at her, at the formidable stranger his wife had become, and for the first time, he understood the true meaning of power. And he knew, with sickening certainty, that his family had already lost. The standoff on the porch of the Hawthorne house was the breaking point. For a long, tense moment, the three of them were frozen, Victor vibrating with impotent fury, Damien shattered and silent, and Mira, calm and resolute. It was Victor who broke. With a guttural snarl that was pure animal frustration, he turned on his heel, barked, "You've ruined everything," at Damien, and got back into his car. He left without another word, the screech of his tires on the gravel a final, petulant admission of defeat. Damien remained, a statue of regret. He looked at the house, at Jack Holloway's protective stance, and finally, at Mira. The chasm between them was no longer just miles and betrayal. It was a fundamental difference in who they were. "He's right," Damien whispered, his voice hoarse. "I did ruin everything." "Yes, you did," Mira said, her voice devoid of triumph. There was only a profound sadness. "But what you ruined can't be fixed with money, Damien. It can't be fixed at all." He finally met her eyes, and she saw in them not the cold stranger who had abandoned her, but the weak, broken man he'd always been, hidden beneath a veneer of charm and wealth. The parental rights. "Do you really mean that?" "A child deserves a parent who sees them as a gift, not a liability," she said softly. "She deserves to be free of Victor's influence and of the weakness that allowed you to bow to it. She deserves a better legacy than the Rothwell one." He nodded slowly, the truth of her words a crushing weight. "You'll get what you want, Mira. The confession, the endowment. All of it. And the papers. I'll sign them." He finally seemed to understand that true atonement wasn't about getting her back, but about letting her and their child go completely. He turned and walked back to his car, a man hollowed out by his own choices. Mira watched him go, feeling not hatred, but a weary pity. His departure wasn't a victory lap. It was the closing of a painful, defining chapter of her life. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Faced with the inevitable PR cataclysm and Celeste's inside information, Victor Rothwell folded. The public confession, carefully worded by lawyers, was released, admitting to aggressive acquisition tactics and establishing a multi-million-dollar environmental fund. The story was damaging, but not as devastating as Mira's personal testimony would have been. It was a calculated corporate loss. For Victor, however, the true loss was his dynasty, Damien. In a final act of rebellion against his father, went further. He not only signed away his parental rights, but also liquidated a significant portion of his personal stock in Rothwell Development, placing the funds, anonymously, into the Oakhaven Community Trust. It was his penance, an act of creation to balance his act of destruction. Then he disappeared, resigning from the company and leaving Seattle, seeking a quiet, private path toward rebuilding a life of his own, free from his father's shadow. Months passed. Winter thawed into a vibrant spring. Oakhaven was buzzing. The new well, engineered with state-of-the-art technology and funded by the trust, was under construction. The old brickworks had been reopened, employing a dozen townspeople. New families, attracted by the promise of stability and community, were starting to look at the town's long empty houses. In the midst of this rebirth, Mira gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She lay in the small, clean room of the Oakhaven Community Clinic, which had been refurbished with trust funds, holding her daughter. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face, the tuft of dark hair, the impossibly small fingers curled around hers. "Hello, Iris," she whispered. Iris Mira Caldwell, a name that honored both the future and the past. The Hawthorne House was no longer just Mira's home. Its restoration became a community project. Jack Holloway was a constant, steady presence, organizing volunteer workdays, teaching her how to properly frame a wall or fix a leaky pipe. Their friendship was slow-growing and deep, built on a foundation of mutual respect, not romance. He understood her need for independence, and she valued his quiet strength. He was family, in a way Damien had never been. The house was transformed. The downstairs was converted into a bright, airy space for the Oakhaven Trust, an office, a community meeting room, and a small library dedicated to local history, with Abigail Hawthorne's journal given a place of honor. Mira and Iris lived upstairs, in the warm, beautifully restored rooms that looked out over a valley teeming with new life. One warm summer evening, a year after she had first been left there, Mira stood on the finished porch, holding Iris in her arms. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the town. Jack was beside her, leaning against a newly painted railing, sipping a lemonade. They watched as the lights of Oakhaven began to twinkle on, a constellation of resilience. "You did it, Mira," Jack said quietly. "You really did it." "We did it," she corrected him, smiling. She looked from the thriving town back to the house, this structure of wood and nails that had been her prison, her sanctuary, and ultimately, her salvation. She thought of Damien, a man who had everything and valued nothing, and of her daughter, who had started with nothing and was now the heir to a legacy of true worth. She hadn't just survived. She hadn't sought revenge. She had taken the ruins of a profound betrayal and built something beautiful and enduring. She had discovered that the strongest structures are not built of steel and glass, but of courage, community, and the unbreakable love a mother has for her child. As Iris babbled happily in her arms, reaching for the last rays of sunlight, Mira Caldwell knew she was finally, truly home. YouTube conclusion and call to action. Mira Caldwell's story is a powerful testament to the human spirit. It shows us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in resilience, community, and the courage to build a new future from the wreckage of the past. She was left with nothing but a crumbling house and a broken heart. But she found her power not in revenge, but in creation. Her journey reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we have the strength to not only survive, but to build something better for ourselves and for others. If Mira's story of incredible strength moved you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. What part of her journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories of betrayal, survival, and ultimate triumph.